Hi, I'm Nick Rains from Leica Camera Australia. The Q3 has a 28mm lens, the Q3-43 has a 43mm lens. What does that mean in terms of angle of view and, more importantly, perspective? Let's start by talking about the angle of view. The Q3 has a 28mm lens which has a 65-degree angle of view, and the Q3-43 has a slightly narrower angle of view at 45 degrees. So that gives you different framing from the same position. And that expression, same position, is important for the rest of this conversation. That will become clear in a sec. So here's a shot from the inside of Sacré-Cœur in Paris. This is shot on the Q3, so that's 28mm. And then this shot here is taken on the 43mm, 45 degrees angle of view. And if I just go back to the first one and then on to the second one, you'll see that it's quite obviously a narrower angle of view. But the key thing here, and remember this when we talk about perspective, is because I haven't changed the camera's position, the perspective cannot have changed. And if I simply go to the Q3 shot and then enlarge it in post, I will end up with exactly the same shot as I got with the Q3-43 because the perspective hasn't changed. Now, what I will lose is resolution, because to enlarge the wider angle shot to match the narrower angle shot, I have to stretch the pixels out. But this is exactly the same as using the crop mode in the Q3 to match the focal length of another lens. You end up with the same angle of view and the same perspective, but you lose resolution. So the point here is that if you don't move your camera, the perspective of the objects within the frame doesn't change. And when I mean the perspective of objects within the frame, what I mean is the relationship between close objects and distant objects. That's the perspective. And in the next section, I want to talk a little bit more about that. But here's a little diagram which hopefully will make this a little bit clearer. What you're looking at here is the two cameras side by side, effectively. The green box on the top right shows the framing of the Q3-43, and the red box at the bottom right shows the framing of the Q3. And the red line shows the angle of view of the Q3, and the green line shows the angle of view of the Q3-43. And what I want to draw your attention to is the nearer figure fills the frame precisely on the Q3-43. So that nearer figure in the green box and in the angle of view diagram fills the frame. So taking a picture with the Q3 from the same position with the wider angle lens makes that subject look smaller and therefore look further away. But what I want you to look at is the relationship of the two sizes between the near figure and the further figure. And in both framings, both cameras, the relationship of the sizes is the same. The proportion that one is bigger than the other is exactly the same. The only difference is that both of them are smaller within the frame on the wide angle lens on the Q3, okay? But the relationship between them has not changed. And it's the relationship between the near and the further object that's the perspective. And without changing the camera's position, that will not change. When we move the camera's point of view, it will change. And that's what we'll talk about next. Okay, now let's just talk about perspective. Here's a similar diagram to the previous one, but in this particular case, I've moved the camera's position. Okay, I've maintained the framing of the Q3-43, and if you look at the green line, you'll see that the framing is the same in that the nearer figure occupies the height of the frame, as shown by the green box image in the bottom right-hand corner of the frame. Also note that the Q3 itself has been moved nearer to the subject so that the nearer figure also occupies the frame fully. So the nearer subject occupies exactly the same height of the frame in both shots. But to do that, I've had to move the cameras. So they can't be in the same position because the angle of view is different. So previously we were talking about changing the angle of view. Now we're talking about maintaining the same framing of a subject with two different angles of view, which means that we have to change the position of the camera to do that. That changes the perspective. And in this diagram, the easiest way to explain it is to show the two boxes side by side. Can you see how the right-hand figure fills the frame in both, but the left-hand figure, which is further away, is considerably smaller inside the red box because I have had to move the Q3 closer. Okay, let me just see if I can draw on this diagram just to explain in more detail what I mean. Have a look at the two boxes in the bottom right hand corner. Can you see how the nearer figure, and I'll just draw a red line, this nearer figure here is equal in both boxes on both cameras. So the cameras are set up in such a way that the framing of the nearer subject is equal in both frames. To do that, because of the different angle of view of the two cameras, I've had to move the Q3 considerably further to maintain the framing, which is shown by the red line. What this means is that the further figure gets proportionately smaller. As you can see there, the figure in the red box is much smaller than the figure in the green box. That's because I've had to move the Q3 that much closer. And the reason that happens is if you look at the angles of view of the two cameras, which is the red and the green lines, so the red line here and the green line here, you will see that whilst the near figure is the same in both cases, there's the top of the frame, there and there, okay, so that figure occupies the top of the frame in both cases. The further figure is completely different. So from the Q3, we have the frame top is there, the frame bottom is here, the bottom of the figure is here, and the top of the figure is here. So you should be able to see there and there and there and there is quite a bit different. And in the bottom right hand corner, that's there and there, okay. Whereas on the Q343, with the green, the top of the frame is much closer to the subject's head, there and there. So very crudely, I know my drawing's terrible, you'll see that the distance here and here is considerably less. That means that the figure is simply nearer to the top of the frame and nearer to the bottom of the frame, therefore is bigger within the frame. That is what perspective is all about. So the key position to look at is, if I just draw a green line here, there's the frame. The frame for the Q343 is here. That's the top of the frame and the bottom of the frame, bottom. And then with the Q3 in red, the top of the frame is here and here. And that distance there is considerably greater than that distance there. Therefore, within the frame, proportionate to the frame, that's the key thing, proportionate to the frame, the figure is smaller, as you can see on the right-hand side of the image. Hope that makes sense. That's what this diagram is for. So we have changed the relationship within the frame of the near and far subjects. That's why with the wider angle lens, by moving the camera forward, you actually reduce the size of the further object quite considerably, and that gives this change of perspective. So here's a couple of examples in real life. Back in Paris again, I found a really nice little shop selling lavender products, and I took this picture on the Q343, and you can see how the bags of lavender fill the frame from top to bottom. Watch what happens when I fade between the Q343 and the Q3 itself with the 28mm lens. To keep the lavender bags the same size in the frame, I've had to move closer to the subject, the bags. By doing that, I've halved the distance to the bags, but the bags to the person in the background remains the same. So I've changed the ratio of distances from about 1:1 to about 1:2, roughly speaking. And that is what causes the change of perspective. So by coming closer and using a wider angle lens, I have pushed the background further away, therefore making any subject in that background proportionately smaller. The other thing you'll notice if I flick between the two pictures again, from the Q3 to the Q343, is how the proportions of the bags have changed slightly. Not so much the top to bottom, but side to side. Can you see how it's flattened off the perspective a little bit with the 43? Whereas if I go back to the 28mm lens, you'll see that the bags actually themselves look a little bit smaller the further away they are from the foreground. So it actually changes the perspective quite considerably. And I think these two images make that point quite well. What about taking pictures of people? Now, if you were going to do a portrait of something like this, like a head and shoulders portrait, you would have to stand closer with the Q3 than you would with the Q43 because of the wider angle of view. So I should warn you, I'm going to use myself as my subject, and this is the result. This is clearly taken with the wider angle lens, and you can just see how much bigger my nose looks compared to my ears. There's a definite full face. My jaw looks like it's extended forward. My head looks stretched. Then let's look at the one taken with the Q3-43, and you'll see a much more pleasing perspective because the camera is about 2 feet, 18 inches to 2 feet further away, and therefore the perspective is slightly flattened, and my ears and my nose now look in proportion. So apologies for the subject matter. It's all I had available at the time, but I think it will clearly show you the difference in perspective between the two lenses when the subject is the same size. And as an aside, I would draw your attention to the background as well, which is much more pleasing in the shot with by the Q3-43 as well. The Q3 includes just too much. It's including a bit of the deck at the back of my house, etc. So the Q3-43 is by far the best camera for portraits of the two cameras. It's not to say you can't use the Q3 for portraits, but you'll get a much nicer, more pleasing perspective on the Q3-43.